And Youri is recording the call. Yes.
Okay, all right, perfect. All right, well, everybody, welcome to another episode of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And we are rejoined by one of my favorite peoples, Margaret Kimberley, senior columnist at Black Agenda Report and an editor there, as well as a member of the Black Alliance for Peace. And you all know her, racial, social justice activist and anti-imperialist activist. Margaret, thank you for rejoining us on 1+1.
Thank you very much.
And all right, and because I know that you have another appointment, let's just get right to the questions then.
Great.
So there's mass civil unrest going on, mass uprisings going on in the U.S. due to this latest racist police brutality, say what you want to call it, state murder, state terror. And there's solidarity activists, there's solidarity protests even happening in Australia, Belgium, New Zealand, Canada, and even all across the United States. So first question, and it may be a stupid question, but first question is, why do you think in this latest act of racist state terror, the protests, the uprisings are nationwide, and then why do you even think there is all this solidarity protest happening in Canada, Belgium, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, and Great Britain?
Well, I think the killing of George Floyd was, as the saying goes, the last straw. I think there was a lot of discontent about many things, and so people were primed to want to take whatever action they could. Here in the U.S., this is an ongoing issue. It ebbs and flows in the way that the media pay attention to the issue of police killings, police violence. It's been a few years since the heyday of the Black Lives Matter movement, but it hasn't disappeared from people's consciousness either. So similarly, a few weeks, maybe a month before George Floyd was killed on camera, and it was so obviously a murder. I think that's one of the things. There was no way to explain it away. A man named Ahmaud Arbery was killed in Georgia, killed by vigilantes, but that was also caught on videotape. And there was, then we learned about the killing of a young woman in Kentucky, Breonna Taylor, who was in her home, and police burst in a warrant for drugs of some kind, which they were in the wrong house. Although killing Black people is, they call it a botched raid. I don't believe it's ever botched when they do that, because that's their purpose. But anyway, but in addition to all of those things, this has been a year of crisis with the COVID-19 pandemic. I think the economy was not in, well, it wasn't working for the average working person, put it that way, even before all the talk of jobs growth. Well, it's mostly low wage work. The average person isn't doing any better. Real wages haven't gone up in like 40 years in the United States.
Yeah.
And some of these dynamics are going on around the world. So along comes COVID. The U.S., more than 100,000 people have died because of incompetence at the top, because our public resources have been decimated by austerity. So the Centers for Disease Control and these institutions that you think are working on your behalf could not handle the situation. And many more people died than should have. The dead are disproportionately Black. There's some cities in this country where the only people who died of COVID were Black.
And even the big breakout in what they call the reservations, where Native Americans are.
Yes. And then come the quarantines and the shutdowns, and more than 30 million people out of work. So all of these things came together. And people are angry and frustrated. Also, one more thing I don't want to forget, the presidential campaign year. And once again, the Democratic Party rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders. So all these people who had hope for some change, they are, as the saying goes, all dressed up with no place to go. And I believe they are very well represented among those white people who are protesting. So I think all of these things have come together to create a population that is expressing its anger and that is losing its fear.
And so the killing of George Floyd, you think that was just the straw that broke the camel's back, so that there was all this pent up frustration. It was an avalanche, that was happening, and that this was just the final straw in which people were like, you know what, we cannot take this austerity anymore. We cannot take the Jim Crows anymore. We cannot take the indifference, and we can't tolerate an unresponsive, rotten system.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's all of those things came together, and you've been seeing in the past couple of weeks, people are doing things that I've been frankly surprised that the protest has been sustained so well. So you have people here in New York City. Our mayor, Bill de Blasio, has done a terrible job of, and New York was the epicenter of COVID. So we have all that anxiety. People working remotely or not working at all who have a greater ability to be active in public, and the scenes of police violence at these demonstrations. All the violence at the demonstrations has been caused by the police. So staff at New York City Hall penned an open letter to de Blasio. Many people were willing to sign their full names. It's the kind of thing that is considered unwise, but people are doing it. The New York Times was caught pitching an article to right-wing Senator Tom Cotton about sending the army in to stop civilian protest. Their staff rose up in anger. The editor of the opinion page lost his job. So this is the kind of thing that's been happening. People are freeing themselves, and it's a great thing to see.
I completely agree with you on that. However, this leads to my second question. Are you concerned that all of the protests, though, not just in the United States, but even elsewhere, are you concerned that some of this is just Trump derangement syndrome?
It's hard not to. I think it's to a smaller degree. Of course, Trump being Trump, he of course talking about he said if there's looting, there's going to be shooting. Basically threatening violence against people. Then he pulls this stunt where there had been a fire set in Washington. It damaged a church that's near the White House. So he strides over to this church and holds up a Bible, upside down though, of course, telling you how much he really cared about Bibles. But he and his attorney general, they were tear gassing people so he could have this dumb stunt. And so he, of course, has made it worse. Then there was a statistic released at the end of last week about jobs growth, which turned out to be wrong, but he was like, and George Floyd, I'm sure, is smiling down from heaven because Black people's employment figures are better. I mean, it's the sort of thing only he could say, a total narcissist making everything about him. Wow. So yes, of course, he has really made it up. That. Yes, he did. He said that. And but I think people at this stage don't expect any better from him. But I think Americans realize the system does not work for them. We are living in a failed state. And this is this demand for greater equality, for justice, for transparency. All of these things are related.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I asked if you're concerned that a lot of the mass protest is just Trump derangement syndrome is I was. Yeah, because looking at some of these mass protests, I'm wondering why don't you think more people aren't giving the cold shoulder to Joe Biden, members of the Black misleadership class, Obama, although virtually, but even the great swindler Al Sharpton,
yes.
Yeah, and then your response to that, and that's why I was asking, are you is a lot of the mass protests just Trump derangement syndrome
Right.
because because of all of because of the Joe Bidens of the world weaponizing this, and not enough people giving them the cold shoulder, let alone telling them to kindly
Well,
bug
I think,
off.
I think there is a line they can't cross. So so the same day that Trump pulls off his stunt at the church, Joe Biden speaks in a black church in Philadelphia, and he's unwell. There's something wrong with him. He says inappropriate things. He blurts out things that make no sense. And in this case, talk about insulting. He said, maybe cops should learn to shoot people in the legs. If a guy with a knife attacks a cop, nobody knew what it was talking about. Nothing to do with George Floyd. Then he takes a knee. Everybody's copying Colin Kaepernick and taking a knee, which is supposed to show some sign of solidarity. But I think it fell flat. Yesterday, members of the Congressional Black Caucus and other Democratic leaders took a knee wearing African kente cloth. Everybody made fun of them. It didn't impress anybody. It just looked ridiculous. And it was such obvious pandering. So I think this isn't going to fly. People are talking about defunding the police, which sounds good, but could be problematic. People are talking about now it's part of mainstream discourse, the idea of getting rid of police. This was something I had never seen or expected to see.
So not just like stopping the militarization of the police, but actually like getting rid of police.
Yeah, and the Minneapolis, this all began with Mr. Floyd's killing in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Their city council has voted to eliminate their police department, which apparently they can't do. So I don't think these protests are going to just disappear when it's clear that people cannot make good on these proposals. I think people are still going to be angry. So I think these people have less credibility than they had before. And as people make these demands, so for example, defunding the police is the hot item, even though it's problematic, but it's something people have seized upon. And the goal is to get rid of this terrorist force and make the police do what you would actually do. You need the police. I mean, George Floyd was being arrested for allegedly using a counterfeit $20 bill. And people realize you don't need law enforcement for that. In addition to the violence and the deaths. So, but these people can't be, I don't think they're going to have the power over people that they used to. The members of the Black Caucus, Biden, congressional leadership all say they're not in favor of defunding police departments. And this is something that is now acceptable. It's now part of the conventional narrative, and they are attacking it from the right. So that's going to be a problem. I don't think these people who traditionally have been who've been used to channel anger and to dissuade people from making radical demands, I don't think that's going to work anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that sort of goes back to the first question and in your first answer to me, which is that in general people are just fed up with the system. They're effing fed up with the system and the fact that although I think Bernie definitely did not have the same kind of balls he had second time around, and I think allowed himself to be cheated this time around and had terrible advisors. But like you were saying, people are fed up with the system and the combination of just COVID-19, endless austerity, and an epidemic of just police murders. That that you really do think that this time around the Obamas, the Joe Bidens, the Hillary Clintons, the NAACP, and the Urban League are not going to get away with co-opting the anger of people into, well, all you got to do is vote for a Democrat, lesser of two evilism, and then you won't have an epidemic of racism and police violence, right?
Yeah, you won't have, I mean, and the whole idea of you just have to vote. Well, people vote. There's nothing about voting that by itself that will get rid of police brutality. So I think these people they don't know what to do. The status quo is being tossed out. People don't want to hear excuses. So we'll see as time goes by. But they are going to lose more and more credibility as it becomes clear that they are not really serious.
Now, unfortunately, we're almost out of time. So
10 minutes.
Okay. well, you just let me know when you have to.
Okay, I will.
Go. All right. So then, this leads to a really good question. Now, I was on YouTube, where I spent a lot of time listening to music and elsewhere, and I noticed that the two pop techno singers I really like. One is Charlie XCX, another one is Dua Lipa, both from Britain, and they were both saying Black Lives Matter. I encourage all of my fans and anyone of conscience to donate to Black Lives Matter. And I thought to myself, no, Youri, don't comment on it. And I thought, okay, no, I do have to comment on this. So I commented on them, and I said to them, actually, you and your fans should not donate to Black Lives Matter because they're part of the Black misleadership class. And I said, if you really want to help out both Black people at home and also oppressed people and Black people outside of the United States and oppressed people, I said to them and hopefully other fans, that they should actually join and donate to the Black Alliance for Peace and to Black Agenda Reports. So the question.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, honestly, and of course, if people want to know why, they should go back to our first conversation and read Black Agenda Reports. So why should those who decide to join the Black civil rights movement and the social justice movement against police violence, why should they join actually Black Alliance for Peace, as well as subscribing to Black Agenda Reports, as opposed to Black Lives Matter and NAACP and the national, is it called the National Action Network? That the thing that Al Sharpton wrote?
That's Al Sharpton. Never give him a dime. He's a complete scoundrel. But Black Agenda Report, we provide news from a Black left perspective, a true left perspective. It's very unique. And like all independent media, we need help to keep going. So I appreciate that you suggested us as a group that people should support. Black Alliance for Peace is I'm also affiliated with, and we're making very important connections between the domestic and the national and the international. And we say that George Floyd's killing is part of a larger dynamic, which kills people. The US government kills people all over the world. Here in the United States, Black people were the victims of a preventable pandemic. Every day, 3 people in the US are killed by the police. People die early because of racism in the healthcare system, for low-wage work, substandard housing, all kinds of things. And we at Black Alliance for Peace, we point out that you can't have justice here and have injustice abroad. So you cannot make a demand for defunding the police without also making a demand that we seriously cut the military budget. The Defense Department spending takes up 60% of our budget in this country, and that means people's needs can't be met. We have 800 military bases all over the world. We have to shut them down. We have to shut down the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, which deprives African people across the continent of their sovereign rights because their governments are in bed with the United States. So you cannot have violence abroad and have peace at home. We must work on opposing all state violence on all fronts. We have a campaign, no compromise, no retreat, end the war on Black African people in the United States and abroad. And we have a candidate pledge. We're asking people running for office to make a commitment for the things that I mentioned: get rid of, cut military spending, end AFRICOM, end this program, the 1033 program, which brings surplus Defense Department equipment to local law enforcement. So there are little towns all across the country that have armored vehicles. And why? To oppress people, obviously. So these are the things we are talking about, and we need organizing. We need good grassroots organizing in this country. You know, so far the protests have been spontaneous, and it's a sign of that people are concerned about many things and are ready to be on the move. But you also need a plan B. So what happens next when the euphoria diminishes somewhat? Who is going to keep carrying the torch to make sure that all of the issues that people are concerned about are addressed? So I thank you for suggesting that people contribute to our work as independent journalists and to Black Alliance for Peace and its organizing work.
Yeah, and both the Black Alliance for Peace and Black Agenda Reports are, of course, following the tradition of not just Martin Luther King Jr., but also Malcolm X, which is really, you know, raising the consciousness of the Black radical tradition. And yes, as you mentioned, making that connection that injustice here at home is unacceptable as well, and it's connected to injustice overseas. And yeah, and I really think people need to start making that connection. That was always my problem with Black Lives Matter, that it was too much focus, focusing on the injustice at home. And then, of course, they later, sort of co-opted themselves because they never wanted to speak out on Obama and his failure to also prosecute crooked police officers.
So police brutality didn't begin in January 2017.
Exactly.
And Obama is the one who, when this issue first came to public attention, every president has the ability to prosecute these cops. If local prosecutors fail, the federal government, the Justice Department, which has a civil rights division, can take on these prosecutions. And Obama refused. I believe the order came straight from him to the Justice Department that you're not going to prosecute any of these cases. So for him to weigh in now and say anything is, I guess he hopes we have amnesia. In 2015, a man named Freddie Gray was killed by police in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And Obama called the protesters thugs. And when he was asked, do you really want to use the word thug? He doubled down and said yes. So he needs to butt out now. Nobody needs to hear from him. If he had wanted to do anything about police violence, he had his chance. He had 8 years to do it.
With a Black attorney general who didn't even prosecute white collar crooks on Wall Street, Eric Holder.
Well, that's not why they get those jobs. So no, he didn't. It depends on us. We can't uplift these people, even if it's someone you voted for. I think it's important for us to see elected officials in an adversarial light. They are only as good as the demands that are made to them.
And has Ilhan Omar or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashid Tlaib, or the candidate or the former candidate for president that I was actually a supporter of, Tulsi Gabbard, have they responded to Black Alliance for Peace's candidates pledge on military?
They have not. None of them have signed. We have had a brief meeting with Ilhan Omar. She was coming into the Capitol, but she did not sign the pledge. And we are working to have a briefing with her and other members of the Congressional Black Caucus. But so far, they say the right things. They have read the mood of the public, but we'll see how radical they want to be. It's clear that we need radical change on a variety of fronts, and they will only support those measures if they are put on the spot.
And I think, do I have time for one last question from you?
Yes, you do.
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. So then, okay, I'm not going to ask you about this police study thing, which you talked about on Facebook. I'm going to save that then for another time. But but going back to Joe Biden's shoot them in the leg sort of thing, and now, to be fair to him, I sort of understand where he's coming from, because a lot of people say, well, if you are going to shoot a suspect or so forth, why do you have to shoot them over here? Why do you have to shoot them in the chest, in the stomach? Why don't you just shoot them in the leg, apprehend them, and so forth? So I sort of understand where Joe Biden is coming from, but explain to me and other people why that comment of his was so problematic, and why, again, this is an example of why this is a guy who is not fit to be in the to be in the White House, and why people need to stop this emotional blackmailing like Noam Chomsky does, using the World War II card, that if you don't vote for Joe Biden, you're a Trump enabler and all that and all that BS.
Yeah, the idea is for police to stop shooting people. The idea that the country is so dangerous and there's so many vicious criminals and cops don't have any choice but to use firearms is just a lie. Most people in prison aren't even in, and of course this conversation leads to a discussion of prison abolition. The police just feed people into the system, arresting people for minor offenses. The number of police who are injured or who die in the line of duty is tiny. We're always told it's dangerous work. It is not. Construction work is more dangerous. More people die in construction accidents than it's less than 100 cops who die in the line of duty every year. Meanwhile, they kill 1,000 people every year. So the idea, we need to get away from this idea of having armed police at all and shooting people at all. And so we have to change the entire paradigm. So this is just another indication of why he's so unfit. He can't even, as the popular saying on social media now, he can't even read the room. He, doesn't even know where this is going. And that's partly because of this black political class, which serves the interests of the neoliberal Democrats and their donors. And their role is
to give Black Lives Matter?
Well, sort of. Black Lives Matter as an organization was problematic from the beginning. They were too close to the Democratic Party. One of the founders, Alicia Garza, is now the dispenser of patronage of, big philanthropist money. So the organization doesn't really amount to much anymore. The term lives on and will live on, and people all over the world, literally, are saying Black Lives Matter. And there are Black Lives Matter chapters over the country, which are of varying degrees of quality, I will say, and their organizational strength. So,
all right.
I've got to run.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're having fun. I was happy I was able to squeeze in this little bit of time, but I'll have to come back.
Well, until then, this conversation will be to be continued. I know you got to run, but I just want to say, Margaret, thank you very much for joining us. We hope to have you back on. And everybody, get Margaret's book, Prejudicial.
Oh, my book. How did I not hold up my book? Oh, my God. I'm such a bad salesperson. Yes, Prejudicial, Black America and the Presidents. You can get it on Amazon. If you have issues with Amazon, get it straight from the publisher, steerforthpress.com. You won't be sorry.
It's a fantastic book, just like The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And we thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Youri. Thanks a lot.